Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a while since I did a show, but I've been making some good progress on pretty much every single avenue of what I do for a living, so apologize for being missing. For those of you brand new, you're like, shut the hell up and get on with your show. So today, I thought we'd go deep. This was going to be about something that has several names, and one of the more interesting names is quantum haunting. And this is going to briefly describe each phenomenon in sort of, I think, in an accurate way using loose, fringy, cutting-edge quantum theory. We're not going to go deep into the science because there isn't anything deep to the science. That's just the truth. And then we're going to get into the actual phenomenons and how I think that potentially these things could work if they exist. For those of you who've seen every single show, you're going to know there's a little bit of a sort of reanalysis of some concepts because I have certain shows that are 100% about each one of these topics. Quantum haunting is something they're calling the mixture of potentially, and this is, I think, is mega healthy here. You have certain scientists that are actually blending together quantum theory, i.e., official science, official mathematics, and the paranormal. About time, right? About time someone starts to attempt this. Again, I don't believe in most cases they have things figured out, but that's still okay. It's still perfectly fine because they are attempting it. There's no particular order to these. I find some of them extremely interesting and others, it's okay. Now, you have to understand when official science gets involved with anything, they have to protect their previous concepts, and under most cases, universities do not want to debut a new theory that is exciting and has concrete evidence that would dismiss 99% of everything else they've said. So they're very careful, and I think they waste your time, they waste the students' time, they waste their own time, because you have a bunch of very senior professors who are like, don't mess up my class. This has been the case with everything in science, especially medicine, where students are saying, well, you know what, I took your medical book and I attempted it in the lab and it doesn't work that way. Bruce Lipton is a guy who was famous for this. And again, he wrote that book, Wisdom of Your Cells, or Wisdom of the Cells. You get through that book and your whole life will be on the right track for the healthy, scientifically based, lab-tested skepticism that you should apply to the entire theory of the medical industry and how it applies science to the human body. Basically, cause and effect models of how things work. It doesn't subtract any of the majority of things that we know that we know works in the body, but it does take some of the more rudimentary theories about how the cell works and completely reanalyzes it. He had to move to Guam to teach medical school because they kicked him out of his university when he was a prodigy student capable of most likely being a doctor at 25 years old. So the very first one we're going to go at is something that's being tossed around. I talk about it a little bit, and its generic quantum category is quantum entanglement. Now, before we get into quantum theory, or as we get into quantum theory, I want to give you the basis of this entire mathematical model as I understand it. And this is really getting into the mathematics when you sit down with someone trying to solve a problem as opposed to reading a theoretical book, right? So when I get with someone who works on some sort of hadron collider or something, I worked with, well, I'll put it this way, I've had some really good conversations with folks that work on the Stanford Collider and other very deep thinkers, some past, some still alive, plus reading dozens and dozens of books in this subject matter. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When you start dealing with infinite number sets, you have a problem plugging them into mathematics in a big way to get the kind of results you're looking for. So what they have done with quantum mechanics is they build up a set of variables that they want to use in an equation. A lot of them are going to be infinite as far as we know. Like to say if you want to put the universe in an equation, Well, it's a big place, right? We don't know where the walls are and the edges are. You want to work with a number set that's going up in value. Well, that goes up forever. You want to deal with the number set that's going down in value. So it's using decimal places. Keep moving it, to the left. Because of this anomaly, they have to quantify what they're doing in order to get past things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, where you can know where something is, or you can know its vector, where it's moving, but you can't know both. Those kind of anomalies, right? So the interesting thing is that when you become some sort of theoretical physicist, the interesting blank check that you get from society is the society is so utterly in the dark about everything that you're about to talk about that you would assume as a young idealistic person that, I'm going to have to learn everything. And because if I get questioned by the person I'm going to talk to across the table, I'm going to have all of this amazing knowledge to counteract or answer either their skepticism or their questions. They soon find out when they leave school, or before they even leave school, when they go home for Thanksgiving dinner, when they go into some sort of other sub-academic location and they start talking about these things, nobody knows anything. And they realize that they're not even getting to the end of their sentence before deer eyes just pop up everywhere. And the interesting thing is because we revere almost genetically intelligence, because we understand that intelligent people make things happen. The Masons were huge, all the way back to the beginning of perhaps the first person that would classify themselves as a Mason, because they knew how to build structures that no one knew how to build. They stopped building things in mud huts, and they stopped building things with straw and wood, and they started making bricks. They started using stone. They started building structures like Parthenons that acted as ceremonial temples. Then they started building structures that kept out the rain. They started building wells that pull water out of the ground, and they built aqueducts to move it around. Just remember, the Roman aqueducts, the least impressive, and all of it's super impressive, but the least impressive effect of the aqueduct technology that the Romans came up with are all those bridges that you see moving the water with the arches underneath. All that's massive engineering, amazing understanding of pi, phenomenal understanding of physics to understand how to build such a structure. But the most amazing thing about the aqueducts is all the work they did underneath the mountains, where they dug tunnels underneath mountains and dug shafts straight up and control water pressure to push water up and get into an aqueduct. That's the part where your mind starts to blow, and they barely ever teach that. But it's one of the most amazing feats of mankind. And it was in full effect 2,000 years ago. Okay. So when these quantum physicists, these theoretical physicists, start having to make money, they've left the college, they've left the university, and now they have to actually either teach or write papers and do research. It's interesting. They live off grant systems, right? They either get the salary for being a professor, maybe under certain circumstances they can get a salary and be in a laboratory without having to produce a result. It's probably very rare. Or they get on projects that have grants either written to them by foundations, the universities themselves, or in rare cases, the government themselves. Or they go work for institutions like Los Alamos Labs, where they're working on things that are just, at the very edge of practical science. Because Los Alamos is not looking for theory, they're looking for results. Also, we have obviously all the skunk works that build these new, Gen 6 and Gen 7 jets, all the different engines where they're now talking to the universe a lot better than just thrust. And so these people have to put things in practical use. Where they put things in practical use, you rarely ever get one of those individuals, male, female, old, young, coming out with some of these theories because they don't care. They're meat and potatoes. They got to make something hit a goal. Otherwise, the Pentagon will give them any money. They're working for one of the aeronautic, kingpins that if they don't hit their goal, they don't get the contract. Well, they'll get money for a little while, but try to jump from one company to another, it's not as easy as you might think, even though they have some phenomenal knowledge. Plus, they're signed up, neck deep in NDAs. They're not allowed to take intellectual property from one company to another. So it's a tough world for them. So when you hear the stuff I'm about to say in this episode, we're not talking about those particular scientists who actually live in the real world with practical applications for their science. We're talking about students, professors, people with time and money to sort of think outside the box, which is super duper healthy. Yeah, you'll have some people that are probably trying just to get by and make a paycheck, but when you start pushing your mind, and you know how this works, you start pushing your mind to the edge and you're finding junk. But if you keep pushing and keep pushing, you might actually come up with some sort of concrete theory about how something works, which may actually be wrong. Maybe wrong 100%, but you're ebbing in the direction. What's interesting about quantum haunting theories, and I doubt there's a whole lot of finances being put behind this, but it's sort of the culmination of various strange experiments over the decades. They can get to a point where something starts clicking so often, the probability that it's actually a real indication that something's happening starts to manifest. Then maybe some money comes in, and then we get some interesting results. And of course, we know that intelligence agencies around the world, from Russia to the United States, have paid for all kinds of wild stuff like remote viewing and that kind of stuff. Now, this could be money laundering situations, but there sure are a lot of folks out there that have claims that they can see things. And I think that a lot of us have had bizarre experiences, which is going to be one of the first ones here. They're trying to get to the basis, the subatomic explanation as to how this is actually occurring. Now, before we jump in, okay, one last statement here is that we do have, I believe, different cosmologies, right? Different systems of existence. So we're in the matter-based, which is really the energy-based wavelength version of reality. So everything's waves of energy, creating the illusion of particles, regardless if we might talk about an ethereal particle mechanism or other higher constructs like quarks and atoms and those kind of things. But then you have the cosmology that is spiritual, the one that makes you feel love, the one that's not just a bag of chemicals in your mind, the one that gives you clairvoyance to see something, the one that gives you not only deja vu, but the ability to predict what's going to happen in the room before it happens. I've told you a couple of my own experiences, which I'll review in this episode. When you experience one of those predictive experiences, you know you're not dealing with necessarily straight energy cosmology. You might be dealing with a higher level cosmology, which is the spiritual cosmology. And it would make sense that there's an ecosystem of varying layers. As I've said in shows 10 years ago, scientists pretty much think that if it's not measurable in a machine that's external from the human body, then it doesn't exist, which in most cases is either photonic energy waves or it would be any type of mass energy wave, right? An electron, for example. They love electrons. Boy, if the electron shows its face, that exists. But if you have some sort of ghost experience, some other type of clairvoyant experience, well, that can't be. That we have to have some other explanation. And they try to get to the point where they deny your experience when the most intense machine that you have access to in this entire world with more sensors than any machine ever built by man is simply your body and your mind, right? Which I believe is fed by that other cosmology, which we call your soul. I recently watched a video where a gentleman talked about his after-death experience, and after he went to the other side and had a very unique experience, he said that I don't like to call it the soul anymore. We're beings, we're not souls. Because he felt like the soul definition was, in his mind, far short of the complexity that is the man. So, interesting. But this first one's called quantum entanglement. I've used it for more physical explanations for you guys in terms of how the energy in our universe actually starts getting entangled with itself, thus creating upper constructs, right? So if you had the base frequency that is all things in the universe, which I like to refer to as the very spherical ethereal particle, hence everything in the universe being spherical, because it is bouncing off that shape and it projects that shape. If the base component of the universe was a square, then I'm pretty sure the moon would be square, the sun would be square, every planet we can see would be square, and a lot of things in our world would be square. How we'd ever get cars going, I don't know. But what they're talking about in the quantum haunting aspect of this quantum entanglement is they believe that two particles can gain association with each other at some early stage in their existence. And then, like two computers being pulled away from each other with a wire in between, of course, they're saying it's just magic dust between them, that they maintain a relationship. They have thrust this theory forward because what they're trying to explain is that phenomenon that Elvis Presley had with his mother. She had a weird feeling that he had been in some sort of accident, some sort of bad situation. And it turns out when he was driving in his car, I don't know if he was on tour, he had a car accident, but he was fine. And she had left a message, and I think he actually just got a hold of her. She called, and he had to assure her. He said, "Yes, Mama, you're right. I had this accident." She could feel it. Oddly enough, and it's sad that my mother is not into anything spiritual. I had a car accident when I was 18 years old, coming home from work about 11 o'clock at night, and a kid hit my car. He hit me lightly, but he flipped his car completely over on its top with two other guys in the car. Everyone survived just fine. When I got home, no more than 15 miles down the road, got into my apartment, I had a answering machine, one of the old kind with the tape in it, and I pushed play, and my mother had left a message on my machine saying, "I just wanted to call and see if you're okay. I got a really weird feeling about you being in trouble or, being in some sort of accident or something." She was 100% right. And it was an exact replica of what Elvis Presley had with his mother. This is what they're talking about. But what they're trying to say is that my atomic composition is linked to my mother's atomic composition, which there could be something there on the energy cosmology, and that we have this connection. Germans used to use on their U-boats, this is a really wild story I covered at one point in one of my episodes, they would take rabbits. And they would breed them, and they would keep the mother on land and take one of the children on the U-boat, the U-boat, take it out, and if they saw an enemy or whatever the indication is they needed to signal back to the mainland, they killed the child. And then the mother would act weird inland. And they were like, boom, it's a protocol. Can you imagine that? This is actually a documented thing they were doing. I don't know if they had any false indications or what have you, but very interesting. But if you take it up to that spiritual level, it is almost immediately understandable that as almost a neuron ejects its core to create another baby neuron, it has the coaxial cable between the two. And if anything happens to the child, it's immediately transferred to the adult that created it. So us having connections with our parents especially makes sense. I don't know if that would, and it's always mothers and their children. I've never heard it with fathers, because fathers obviously do not give birth. They do not hold the child for 9 months. So I never heard about the male rabbit, for instance, having the same indication. It's always the female. And that makes complete sense, doesn't it? I mean, theoretically it does, right? So they spun this up, one more classification. Instead of calling it just quantum entanglement, they call it consciousness entanglement. And again, I think we're talking about something that is very, very interesting, that we do have this connection. And I think if you're a mother, you definitely have felt this in your lifetime where you know where your children are. I've had this with friends of mine as well. I know that they're in trouble. It's a strange thing. I don't know if it's simply the affection, or obviously girlfriends of mine, a couple of them being in problems and just knowing that there's an issue there. Sometimes they're doing things they shouldn't be doing, and you can just sense it. It's a very strange thing. I've had 2 or 3 very profound experiences in that realm, but I will keep the information private for their sake. But it definitely was very complex stuff that I was sort of told. And it was almost like they were thinking it. They were fearful that I would find this stuff out. And then through just a weird comedy of things popping up, the evidence presented itself like within hours of them doing it. And you're like, ooh, did you do this? This is really weird. Oh, well, there's that, And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, So we have some amazing connection between the two of us that could be one, parent to child, obviously mother to child more specifically, And then as you remember what the Hindus said about making love, and the reason why they said you shouldn't be promiscuous, is that when you make love to someone and you climax with them, that you're trading parts of your soul. You're binding with them for the rest of your life. And so if you're cheating, well, I shouldn't say that. It's not even that. If you are sleeping with a ton of people before you find that special someone, that by the time you find the special someone, you're bound to a ton of other people. And so you can't give your full self to the person that you're connecting with. I think that's very interesting. And, once you do that, once you violate that principle because you didn't hear it when you were a child and you didn't buy into it, perhaps if you did hear it, then you'll never know. You'll never know how some couples are just like Bonnie and Clyde, man. They'll do anything together, rob a bank together, die together, right? And other folks can't seem to find anybody and keep it going, Now, this next one is very interesting because it's called the observer effect. And this gets to the slit lamp experiment, which some of you took science classes and you understand this. This will blow your mind if you've never heard this before. And a lot of times you'll just forget it. You'll just forget this was ever an experiment. And you think about it as an adult, you're like, oh, yeah, that is really weird. What they do is they actually take light and they shove it through usually 3 slits in a piece of paper, some sort of surface, and it projects on a wall. When observed by a human being, those slits project on the final surface differently. When the human being doesn't observe it, it's a different frequency. So this is just something that happens, right? And I have an episode. I can't remember which title it is because there's 800 plus. But I have an episode that is about the idea that we are obviously exuding lots of frequencies as human beings. We do. We have heat. We have all kinds of thought process, a bunch of milliamps running around the mind. And when we stare at someone, there's that whole thing that they can sense that you're staring at them. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling before. Man, it's just the hairs of the back of your neck go up. But if you think about your eyeballs, for instance, they're a concave chamber of a really hard thing called your skull, with some fairly pliable eyeballs that also have a hole. They have a lens on them and that kind of thing. But it could be that these things are simply projecting our thoughts very specifically like radar dishes, right, which bring everything to center and then it could project out. And when you're staring at someone, they can feel it, especially if you're having a lot of thought process about that individual as opposed to just looking around, you don't care. You're just observing, you don't care. But when you're in an airport, for instance, people watching is like one of the most entertaining things about it. But where they take this is very, very interesting. They take it up to a level where they're talking about things like ghosts and poltergeists. And they actually submit a theory that I have never said on this show. I never even thought about it. Which is, there's the old saying, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make any sound? And of course, it's more of a theoretical sort of relevance statement than a scientific statement. Of course it would. But if no one's there to listen to it, well, what would be the point of even saying the statement, right? What they're suggesting with this theory is if a human being didn't look in a particular direction in a house, would a ghost exist? Or does it take the human being to look in that direction for the ghost to exist? Part of it would be practical. I would imagine that being seen as a ghost might take some effort on the ghost's part, to certain, wiggle some sort of light frequency if that's how you're seeing them. Remember, if you see a dark ghost, they're absorbing light. If you see a light ghost, they're emitting light, right? That's how it would have to work. But then poltergeists, well, they're known for interfering with electromagnetic forces. So you might have a lamp, a sconce on the wall in your kitchen or in your room somewhere, and it wiggles the brightness, off and on. I have seen, it's funny, I think these were all gags, but when I was a child, it would come around Halloween time and the local news channels would broadcast from a haunted house, right? And they would always have some footage of this kind of stuff, which I think was all tongue in cheek. But it was very interesting that it kind of opened your mind a little bit to, this could possibly happen. Then you have movies come out like Poltergeist, right? And you start getting conditioned with fiction. that this stuff exists. I can say as much as I would have loved at times to have seen some frequency of light flicker in my house, other than a power outage that was soon to follow, I've never seen anything like that whatsoever. I can't say that I've ever seen a true ghost, ever. Dark or light. I definitely had some nightmares as kids, as a child, and those were just dreams, where I was seeing something at the end of the hallway. I remember one of the weird reoccurring nightmares I had as a kid is I walk out of my hallway. It was very poltergeisty from 1982. And I was looking down the end of the hallway, and there was this rectangle hovering at the end of the hallway, and it was sort of a void of light. And there was, it always kept night lights on just in case. And this thing was just kind of coming at me slowly. And it was just a rectangle, for God's sakes, right? But as a 4-year-old, it was utterly terrifying that this perfectly geometric shape was coming at me. Kind of funny. But what they want to also attach to this concept of this observer effect is the notion that when you point a camera at something, sometimes it doesn't show up in the camera. You take the camera away and suddenly the human being can see it again. Now, we do have a group of people on the internet that I believe are shysters. They're trying to have fun. Maybe they're trying to just be entertaining. They will take pictures of the sun, and they're using, pretty decent lenses to pull it off because, you can fry your camera pretty good pointing an optic at it because it's a magnifying glass right back on the inside of your camera. It will fry the inside of your camera half the time. But they'll put some filters and stuff on their camera and film a sunset or a sunrise where you don't get as much exposure of the sun's rays. And of course, it's echoing various copies of the sun as it bangs around inside the lenses. And of course, they post this online as if there's 2 suns, 3 suns, whatever. And then of course, you'll get this gigantic halo effect sometimes, where sometimes the atmosphere will produce that, but a lot of times it's only in the camera. But they don't ever say that. They don't say they're not seeing it with their eyes. These little tchotchkes where they're trying to make you believe in perhaps Planet X theories, it's only in the camera, right? Now, the very fascinating one, which doesn't have to do with the observer effect, I don't think, is zooming a camera in on a star. It is starting to get really bizarre that we know that if their theory is correct, and we have any type of atmosphere above us, that atmosphere is going to shake and wiggle, and you're going to get any stable light on the other side, it's going to wiggle. And of course, people believe in the firmament dome, think they're staring through water. I guarantee if you were staring through water, refraction and just diffusion itself, you wouldn't be able to see much past, a few miles of water. You wouldn't see much because it would just be scattered all over the place. However, when you pay attention to these videos, we have all the sparkling light, this kind of phosphorus light around a star. If you pay attention, it's actually shaping itself like a sphere. It's strobing around a sphere, as opposed to just being the refraction you get from pool water when you stare down into your pool, right? A lot of you will get in the pool and stare out, and you'll see, everything wiggle that's in the sky. And you might look at the sun when you're down there. But it's going to be totally arbitrary to the shape of the sun being a sphere. But these close images, we have a listener named David. He takes some of the best shots of these things, and he's always improving his camera. And people are catching on. People are doing this like crazy now. And it's been going on for probably 10 years now. Fascinating, right? I don't think this has to do with the observer effect, but I think it's very interesting that we have alien sightings as well, where people say they'll see an alien, try to take a photograph of it, and they can't see it in the photograph, but they definitely see it with their mind. You might have people that say they've seen aliens, and then when the alien figures out that they're being observed, then suddenly they can't be seen, kind of ebbing towards the interdimensional travel of these beings, or that they're here on a different plane. People who take DMT, the dream molecule, from Joe Rogan to Graham Hancock to a ton of folks, they immediately get, one of my closest friends have seen, they get escorted by these gray aliens. And my buddy said that his was black, which correlates with the Zimbabwe observation of 30 or 40 kids that saw the one that landed just outside the grounds of their school. They ran around the corner. They're 6 feet from this alien, and they said it was black. Had a silver suit. I mean, no, it had a black suit in that one. And it basically talked to the kids with its mind, and it said, you know, you got to take care of your planet because you're about to screw this whole place up. And I don't necessarily think they're talking about how hot it is. They're talking about weaponry and just being stupid. So, who knows? The next one's called Superposition. And what this is sort of a more advanced version of the observer effect, which is that they think that there might be various states of matter, energy. Always think of energy and matter, the same exact thing, right? This was known hundreds of years before Einstein was ever conceived, that it takes on a certain property when unobserved by mankind. But when we observe it and we add our energy of observation to it, again, your eyes being just literally radar dishes, right? Which are not only emitting but catching. Remember when your key fob doesn't work on your car because the battery's running low and you're in a parking lot and you got to find your car? You could put it up to your temple and hit it, and all of a sudden it broadcasts like 30 feet further and your car will chime. It's using your brain as the broadcast station. So it's putting that into your head and then using your eyes, I believe, as the echoing system to push it out a little bit further, a little more specific. So you can actually turn your head and you're the radar, you know, you're actually the radar sending it out to get the bounce back. And eventually, of course, your horn, your little alarm goes chirp, chirp, you know, and you're good. The superposition is the very specific thing that says that there is various fields of energy. Just think of entangled energy, that when you add your little spice to it, things manifest into other things. Now, you can see me right now because something that is not me is bouncing off me and going into the lens of this camera and being recorded on a memory stick, right? The reason why you see me isn't because of me. The reason why you see me is because of the light that hits me. And then it's going to be saved, rebroadcast out of your visual device, and it's going to bounce off your eyes, right? I mean, you don't think about it that way a lot, but that's exactly what's taking place. So this is an advanced version of that. Imagine there's life forces around you. And we're going to talk about that sort of shine thing here in a little bit because it's part of this game too. But there you have a house and there's some spirit there. And it will not be visible until this sort of magic sauce of serendipity, of this complete randomness happens where they're traversing in front of you. You're in a state that by looking at them, you're mixing up their sauce in a way that it's almost like you're the light that makes them turn into the entity such that you can see it. You know, mankind can't see, you know, some of the estimates are 97% of the entire spectrum of existence. We can't see it because our eyeballs don't do it. And if you take my information I put in the Bigfoot episode from the anthropologists that have studied the visual cortex of the mind, we do not use 90% of our visual cortex because of what looks like an inserted protein blocker across the first layer of the cells that are responsible for metabolizing up vision, as if we've been genetically modified not to see what could be seen. Now, even if we got back the whole 90% of our visual cortex, there's no telling what spectrum we would be able to see at that point. Maybe the 3% we can see might jump up to only 7%. Maybe it jumps to 15%. Maybe it jumps up to 100%. It might be best that man can't see entities from another dimension because it might just be too difficult to deal with. You know, the Aborigines talk about the dream world where once you pass, you're in that other world. And they have various ceremonies where they do these walks through their territory. And I think that if I was accurate, they say the shaman can see the other folks. And it could be that they are just saying that. It could be that they've trained their mind to see it. It could be they have the force in them, right? And they're genetically tuned to see that particular aura moving around. Don't know. The Day of the Dead is interesting that way because they are trying to live in harmony with the fact that we are born, we live and we die, and we're born and we live and we die. Some of the other states that are inside superposition, which is very, very interesting, is that they, and this seems so obvious, when I say this to you, it'll be so obvious to you that this would be potentially the catalyst for this effect. But taking into account dawn, dusk, it could be some sort of altered state. You've taken a drug. The movie Altered States with William Hurt is one of the most amazing movies that you absolutely should see in your lifetime. But it's about changing the way that your brain is metabolizing the data coming in, especially people on ayahuasca. I've taken acid from the Grateful Dead 3 times, and I never saw anything, new. I just would look out and I would connect things together, and I definitely saw the sacred. Well, I saw the sacred geometry symbol for life at any type of brightness on a cloud, any type of fringy overexposure of the sun bouncing off one of the edges of the clouds, and a line between them all. And my buddy, Richard Taylor, he took me out and he says, I was having a blast on the sofa with my eyes closed. I was seeing so many crazy illustrations. He goes, okay, enough of that. You got to come outside. And I did want to go outside because it was hot. But I laid on this blanket and I'm looking straight up. And he goes, you see that? You see those little, the symbols of life? And he goes, they're connected, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I see it too. This is one thing we can totally share when we're on this stuff. So just that little indication that when you're on real acid, and I would not suggest trying to get acid unless you really know the source, because you can get some brain damaging, lethal stuff. And with fentanyl out there, I wouldn't touch anything without someone really vouching for its source. These different states of the energy coming off of the sun, right? Think about dawn. Dawn is going to be a very still evening going into the birthing of, and all the transitional exposure of the sun on your eyes. So it's going to be ramping up the volume of all the energy you're going to get from the sun as it comes back around to expose on you, right? And then, of course, the same is true when it goes away from you. Now, there could be, because when you're at night, you've now rested and blown out a lot of your energy, used it up for dreams and that kind of stuff. And then here comes the sun. So it's filling up your tank in the morning sequence. And that could potentially expose more, depending on what's making what occur, right? As it's going away, you're full of energy. You have been filled up all day long, especially if you went out on the beach or got some sun in your backyard or you worked outside, you're full. And believe me, a lot of that stuff goes right through your house and gets into you. But obviously being outside would fill up your cup. And now as it's draining away, now you're using your battery energy to see things. And that could be a completely different algorithm. So I would say that if you were in a space in the world where you believe that haunting could be a potential reality for you, you got a house, you got a weird place, dusk and dawn might be a very interesting place to see that. Now, the other one too, which is not mentioned here, would be using various lenses. I mean, really like glasses, polarized lenses that you take to a 3D movie, something. If you got some optic library, my uncle was a optometrist for 42 years. He had every single lens. But if your father's a photographer, you're a photographer, you have all kinds of different lenses you could use. Now you want to subtract out what the lens would normally do. If you have a star filter, don't go crazy as you see stars, but look in between the stars and see if something else exposes. It is just light coming into your eyeballs and then being recognized by your brain. But imagine, I just want to leave you with the footnote, which I already said before. Imagine that we are simply limited from seeing these other spectrums because it would be too much chaos for the human mind as it's currently designed in the human form for us to metabolize on a daily basis. We could all simply go crazy if we could see all this stuff. And there's been several movies where people can read each other's minds. And by the time, Douglas Adams has so many funny things on this, that once you open up consciousness and gain telepathy, societies go crazy and kill each other because they hear all the thoughts everybody else has, right? There's a great Twilight Zone with Darren from Bewitched, the first husband, and he flips a coin into a kid's newspaper tray because he grabs a newspaper and it sits on its end. And the entire episode, he can read people's minds. He can just hear them talk. And he has this wild day, and it's the most incredible day. And there's a little twist at the end. I'll let you see for yourself. It's something like that. Okay, so you know the brain is a place that scientists just make believe they understand. With AIs creating these gigantic statistical models, it is going to blur what they understand because they're using trillions and trillions of associations from everything man's ever said, written, to build up a statistical probability of how to respond to a human being, which you now with ChatGPT and the Amazon AI, Anthropic, right? They're behaving so human. I mean, in terms of the Turing test that Turing came up with, we're thousands of degrees beyond where he was trying to say, if you think this is a human being, then it passes the test, right? So scientists are trying to figure out kind of how it works. And obviously, your brain is nothing more than a giant collection of tubes, right? Inside that structure, held suspended in your gray matter, is all of your neurons, right? Built by the center of an egg, by the way. At least that's some of the cholesterol that can contribute to a nice, healthy brain. They're trying to figure it out. They're saying, well, we know that mankind has consciousness, but what the hell is consciousness? Now, obviously, your more scientific person is just going to say, well, you're a bag of chemicals and you're simply a supercomputer doing exactly what the LLMs are doing inside AIs. They're statistically programming, they're statistically remembering from birth the neural net from the parents combining themselves. So you basically give your AI sort of the stub that it needs to be human. And then as it interacts with the universe using all of these amazing sensors, eyeballs, touch, sound, taste, hearing, and all that stuff, it's building the model very, very quickly at billions of contributions per second. When you lay in bed at night, think about how many little sensors on the outside of your body are reporting into your brain. And then think about, having a dream, and then that's not even real, technically speaking, as we call, this cosmology of energy. And so what they have done is they've basically said that maybe the tubule design of the brain is, which is your whole body's a big tube. You understand that, right? Everything in your body's a gigantic cyclical tube. You put it in your mouth and it goes all over those tubes in your body and comes out the other side, right? And we don't like to think about that. It's something very strange. But the brain is a very similar mechanism. So what they're trying to say is that the shape of the brain is actually harnessing energy in a way that can actually perform the task of memory. It rides on the back. Anything that occurs is sort of you might say it's a binary packet of information, right? Just like a CD or little bumps and grooves on a record. And it gets suspended inside this energy that is then encapsulated in the tubes of your mind, and it keeps educating itself, giving you essentially a quantum explanation for perhaps how the soul might behave on top of your body, right? Usually on this show, what I tell you is, I believe in the soul-body-mind connection. The soul, the spark of life, is simply the soul leaving its cosmology, penetrating this cosmology, thus producing the spark of light, which I believe is a plasma discharge. And then it starts entangling inside of the brainstem, which then builds the rest of the body, right? When you're tiny, your brain and your skull starts building first, and the body attaches to it. When you're born, your head's pretty huge and your body's pretty small, and then it reverses the role as the body, catches up. So what they're saying is, potentially, all of these ghosts and apparitions that people might see in the universe is simply that when someone passes away, the brain starts to decay. Who you are, conservation of energy, you can't hide energy in the universe. So it continues. It doesn't have any limitations. It doesn't diffuse like the mass of the body into the soil, right? It continues because it's uninhibited by anything. And that's sort of my general definition to myself about a soul. It's on a different cosmology. You can't do anything to it. If you were to get hit by a tank and your body's going to disappear, it's going to vanish, right? Because it's going to get just obliterated. Your soul is kind of just standing there going, oh, what happened to the body? Oh, wow, that's wild. It's just completely unaffected by what's going to happen to you. So they're trying to explain, they call it the orc-ore theory. Very strange. Now, they also like to say the quantum field when they possibly can, and this would be sort of a rudimentary definition of containment. of pressure, but on a subatomic level, as opposed to what we might think of as, you're in some sort of submarine and you're going down in the ocean. And so now you're in this capsule that's got the pressure to keep your body from exploding or getting crushed. It has the atmosphere that you breathe and everything else, right? I think that most cosmologists do get to a point in time when they say we absolutely have to be in some sort of container. It doesn't have to be a container like a goldfish bowl. It could be simply the way that this energy travels in this space that we're in, that it actually creates this barrier. It's actually sharing potentially with other universes, which is why you see that picture all the time of thousands of spheres. And they'll say, this is how the universe is put together. It's thousands of universes, infinite numbers of universes. Could be, who knows, right? But if we're a little subset of consciousness, which obviously we are because you can hear me right now, they're basically trying to give you a quantum explanation of the ecosystem of your brain. When it exists, allows you to have individuality. And then when you pass away, that individuality can travel in the universe and potentially become a ghost or go on to back to the cosmology of that energy. I think you feel me. Now, because of that previous, it's ORCH-OR, OR being the condition of or, right? Or and. They push in there the near-death experience as the advanced application of that other theory to say, if we are this collection of frequencies, and again, this is parsing the soul down to this, energy universe, which we might as well do it because we do exist, and I think we do have a soul, and so, you might as well just get some model around it. Without a model, we can't do anything with it, which is the whole basis of quantum physics, is to make sure, again, you take this infinite cosmology of the soul realm, and when you come down and become an individual, you get a first, middle, and last name. Well, that's a quantum of that energy up above, right? So when someone goes through some sort of death experience, what's fascinating about the whole near-death experience is that we always talk about the stories that people give us, right? And there's some fascinating differences in story. Again, I never hear anybody say they walk up a staircase. I never hear anyone say they met Jesus. I just never heard it in my entire lifetime. But where they go, they're extremely happy. But before you go up and out and then potentially back, because that's the only way we get those stories, what they're talking about is because they know they can't explain the other realm, which is 99% of the experience typically that anybody wants to talk about when they get back. But a lot of them will talk about what they see in the room. I talked about that in one of those cases, famous cases of my episode just 2 back, right? Part 3. What they're saying is that energy is obviously, proximity-wise, very close to your body, right? So you're in a car wreck. Plenty of people have said this. They had some triggering moment. This is what I want to really spend some time on. And then they float away from their body. And then they go to this other location and they get told this famous line, it's not your time, you got to go back, right? What's interesting about the story is whether or not, and this is scientifically pretty absolute, when they will say your heart stopped, you had no brain activity, you were just a slab of meat on a table and stuck in a car. But when they don't have all the little EKGs and stuff to prove that you're dead in your car. Some people have overdosed, had the same exact experience, but it's the ones that were in the hospitals when they passed away. And I've heard near-death experiences in the last 2 months where a guy got sick. He just literally got sick and he overheated and died on the table, and they all gave up on the guy. And poof, he goes out and he goes and sees this other realm and then ends up getting told he's got to come back. And then all of a sudden the body resuscitates. Interesting, right? The Hindus talk about the silver cord when one has an out-of-body experience. The silver cord is this, obviously, here's the funny thing. I used to think it was metaphorical, that you would leave your body, and it is sort of the extension cord that will always bring you back to your body and put you back in. Because you're not dead when you're having an out-of-body experience. You're simply letting your consciousness roam. Now, a funny story is a friend of mine, back when I was working for the TurboTax place, way back in the 80s, he said his girlfriend had this experience. And I said, okay. And he wasn't sure. He wasn't sure if she was telling the truth. And I said, well, it's very simple. I said, at night, put a sweater in one of your drawers. and have her look in that drawer while she's out of body. But obviously, if she gets up and opens the drawer, the deal's off. And he smiled, and he never came back with a report. So a lot of folks just say these things to, get a little bit of special Chotsky in their life, and they're not really doing what it says. But I do believe some people could potentially do that. So the interesting thing about near-death experiences that we never really talk about is what checklist has to occur to release the soul into that stasis where you're going to observe yourself, you're going to go up, potentially meet the next layer up of the owners of the Matrix, and then be told it's not your time, you got to go down. Which is fascinating that there's so many of those explanations by so many different cultures, people, ages, from 8-year-olds all the way up. The 8-year-old woman that girl who's now, I don't even know if she's still alive, but she describes seeing basically something like Westworld in 1954, seeing glass offices with basically what she described as computers with keyboards and backlit keys on them in 54. Okay. Backlit keyboards didn't exist until like 1999, 2000, at least in the mainstream world. What would have to be that thing where your body lets go? Is there some sort of connection to it that gets you back to your body? Or is this truly just a simulation like the Matrix, and they're just simply putting you right back in your body? And the impossible, the Frankenstein paradox, which he was trying to inject life into dead matter. That's how he was building Frankenstein, right? This thing just seamlessly occurs. This consciousness that you are, i.e. soul, whatever, returns back to the body that's laying down, and the heart starts beating again. The brain doesn't necrose out of existence. You don't wake up with brain damage or anything. You might have your injuries, but all the vital things that man can't do in reanimating a dead tissue happens automatically with these cases. And I think that's something that maybe is so profound for the doctors that it's like a host in Westworld looking at a photograph of the outside world. They just look at it and they go, it doesn't look like anything to me. They can't process what they're seeing. And so it's so inconceivable. And of course, they don't have any training, with what this could possibly be. They all have to go to their spiritual upbringing. They have to go to any type of out-of-box thinking, which medical industry doesn't really have any of that, right? Unless you're a surgeon inventing surgeries. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. What has to be satisfied to make it happen? I think what would be interesting is if you could get all the medical information from really hardcore cases around the world and say you had EKGs hooked up to them, you had, sort of pads sensing the brain activity and what have you. What were the vitals right when this occurred? Because this person said they saw the room themselves. You don't need to know that that's true or false. You pronounce them dead. They had an experience. They had a very unifying experience at the other side with someone telling them it's it's not your time, you have to go back. And then they reanimated their own body. So what were the vitals the entire time? And then have an AI or someone mulch that together in big machine learning to find out what the checklist is. Well, if this gets to that, it gets to this. Remember that old movie Flatliners with Kiefer Sutherland? Really odd movie, but it was a bunch of college kids. And you have to think this probably happened in real life. I don't know. They were flatlining each other to have an experience and then resuscitating themselves because there was a certain window. I don't even know if this is real, but it was in the movie where they said they could recess a body back to life. Interesting, right? I had a buddy of mine who was 70 years old. He was at the Bel Air Country Club, which he's been a member forever, has a massive heart attack in the main eating area. And because it's littered with old white guys with a lot of money and prestige, I mean, I used to eat breakfast right next to John Williams. They got defibrillators all around the club, all on the golf course, on golf carts. I mean, they're going to bring you back to life. So they popped him and got him back to life. Now, when he came back, he didn't have any afterlife experience. But one of the things he told our mutual friend is he said, it was just black on the other side. He goes, there was nothing there. And part of me is like, well, you didn't die, dude. You came back. So maybe you didn't need to run out there and have that experience. But I took I took this, I smoked this stuff once. This is like, 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago. I forgot what it's called. It's just an herb. It was legal and it came in all these different strengths. And I watched these dudes trip out online, and I hadn't taken any acid yet, but I smoked the biggest hit I could smoke. Actually, I smoked a small amount. Sorry. I was on a sofa. I smoked it twice. I had two completely different experiences, but wow, what a wild different experience I had the second time. First time I smoked it, I was terrified. I was like, oh God, I don't want to, have these rolling around experiences where I lose my mind and tear myself up being in some other state of consciousness. But what I felt was a piece of metal going through my chin, out my mouth area, but it tasted like metal. And the weird thing was, it reminded me of chrome. It reminded me of silver. It was a very, not really silver, more chrome, like a metal coated. And, if you play around with that stuff when you're a kid, you get kind of a scent for it, the chrome coating and that kind of stuff, engine parts and that kind of stuff. That's what it smelled like to me. It's very strange and tasted in my mouth, right? Second time I smoked it, unrelated to this, I did a big hit. It only lasts for a few minutes. It's crazy. And I felt like, immediately was in a small country house room with no furniture. I'm floating in the center of the room with a door in front of me. There's a light above, and it's all that kind of like creamy yellow color that an old house has. And I was being suspended there was two very elliptical spheres, right, very stretched out, and they were rotating into each other like the MasterCard logo, where you got that thing in the center where it connects. And I was the body in the center of these two things rotating. And I just sat there for, 2 minutes, and it was gone. Never touched the stuff again. So it's interesting how altered states, as part of these theories, can make you see certain things. Now, whether or not you're imagining or not, it's strange, but this stuff will get you there instantaneously. Very strange. Or if you take acid, the fastest I've ever had acid do anything to me, when I took probably about 6 tabs, it's still 20 to 30 minutes before it ever gets to you, I have a whole episode on acid if you want, but it's in season 1. So this next one is about the stuff I love, which is sort of the mirrors and rings and things that by Stephen King's definition have the shine to them, right? Now, I've never had any anomaly with a mirror. Mirrors are wild. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers, had 2 giant mirrors facing each other in the bathroom. And so it created that infinity tunnel. And because they were off just a tiny bit, from being level, it turned. But you'd put your hand up and there's like just, it's like when you film yourself with your video software and it creates the tunnel, right? It's the same sort of thing. But this is just a mirror. And so I grew up with this wild experience. I could go to my grandmother's whenever I wanted and play in this mirror. And I would and the light was all around the mirror. So it gave this real romantic kind of Hollywood lighting that was surreal. And of course, as the mirror is reflecting down the tunnel, it's losing light. So the wildness was, it actually had vanishing light going around the corner, just ever so slight, right? And so it makes the brain open up. It makes you go, wow, how's this doing what it's doing? And you figure it out, right? But still, it's just a weird, surreal thing. But people have said that, mirrors have shown them things that aren't in the mirror. There's this funny thing going around where people are wondering how they put a towel against the mirror, how when they turn their head sideways, how is it seeing them on the other side of the mirror? Anyway, that's light reflects, okay? And you're not seeing it. The camera is seeing it. The camera sees both sides of you, right? The shine thing is very interesting. And what they're basically saying is take the other theory that there's some sort of echo. Well, the last one was all about this or effect where it's actually your consciousness. It's actually you. It's manifesting things second to second, right? Well, the other theory I think makes a lot of theoretical sense is that just like they said in the movie The Shining, when Dick Halloran is explaining to the kid, Doc, he goes, it's like when someone burns toast. He doesn't really explain it, but what he's saying is it leaves the smell of toast in the room, and you take the toast away and you can still smell the burned toast. That's leaving something behind, right? It's quite brilliant. I think Kubrick did a massively wonderful job with his book, and I don't know why Stephen had such a problem with that, but whatever. But the idea that you might think your house is truly haunted because you're seeing individual ghosts moving around and they might be whispering to you or trying to scare you away, or they like you, whatever, right? That's, I think, different. The shine would be you put on a ring, kind of like Stephen King's book Dead Zone with Christopher Walken. He could touch things and he could see where that object was the last time it was interacted with a human being. So they give him a knife and he'd touch it and he'd see the murder. And he'd tell the cops and they'd go find the guy. And of course, it's a great movie, by the way. It's kind of weird because it's shot in wintertime, kind of in the New England area, if I remember right. But it's interesting to say. Now, I did a whole episode on this many, many years ago. And it's called Electronic Voice Phenomenon, or EVPs. And this is when someone is recording something in a room, just like I'm doing right now, right? Got a microphone, I'm talking into it. And let's say I take this back and I adjust the levels, and suddenly I hear another voice come over the line. Now, obviously, if you picked up a radio station, that's why they have station identifications. I'm recording for over an hour, so every 15 minutes by law, the FCC says you got to tell everybody who you are and where you are. It's just law. You used to have ham radios. People used to work out of their basements. And so because this is all wires that respond to electrical frequency, back in the day, say it's 1980 and before, you had private, CBs everywhere. I mean, I used to go on skunk hunts with my dad in the 70s where some dude would hide and everyone uses their CB radios and they ask you to say something on the radio. There's some rules about it. They can't make you squawk the entire time, but they're looking at their needles for how strong your signal's coming back to their CB to find out where you are in the town. You're hiding. You can't hide in the garage and close the door, but you can really park yourself in some pretty weird places. And you used to call it skunk hunts. It was a blast. So sad CBs stopped being a thing. It was really cool back in the day. But anyway, you could get crosstalk from various places. Now, that's not what EVPs typically are. EVPs are very mysterious, very specific voices that can be aimed at the folks that are actually recording, or it could be really just kind of picking up sort of spiritual talk between two other beings that you don't see. And what's interesting about it is that we have rarely been told that aliens, for instance, speak. The Greys, all the theories of the Greys, they don't speak. They work telepathy with you. And so, my little experience with the Grey at Christmas time, I felt like he talked to me. He goes, are you going to be okay? And I said, I guess. And this little thing happened. Go see my, there's plenty of episodes on aliens. I'll explain it to you there. So the idea that it's non-human, probably not it. That if you were a human being and you want to just, I don't know, I would think that the universe has some rules about how they could interact with us, because if there were no rules, I think all of us would see our dead relatives, if nothing else, not for scary purposes, but just, I'm okay. Hey, I'll see you later when you get, it's awesome up here, man. You should hear the music. The food is awesome. Let's do this, right? It never happens, right? So this next one is actually very interesting, and it's an advanced theory of this sort of shining theory. And it's called the place memory or stone tape theory. Very interesting. Stone tape theory. Tape being obviously a term that was coined back when we used to record things on tape all the time. I don't even know what you call it today. But what they're saying, this is fascinating, man, is that because quartz rock and limestone rock is very porous and very interactive with energy, right? We use quartz for radios. And again, like I keep telling you guys about the pyramids in Egypt, the quartz that the limestone that you can see in the Great Pyramid on the inside, which is most of it, and the other two are all inside, that's all very electrical limestone. But the capstone that you see on the Great Pyramid, that is non-conductive limestone. It's a different type of limestone. When you put that all together and you put the valence back on the outside, you've got basically a power plant. But what they're saying in this is that certain rocks could potentially, let's say if Gettysburg is being fought and it's got a lot of limestone in the area or quartz rock in the area, Potentially, it's all over. I don't know about limestone, but I know quartz is all over the Grand Canyon in various areas. They're saying that these rocks could potentially absorb all of this emotional energy because it's all made of the same stuff, right? It's absorbing into the rock and looping inside the rock until perhaps someone puts their hand on it and it pops out and they can have an emotional experience. I've said this a few times, but when I was a kid and I would look at statues, either in photographs, especially in real life, big stone statues, right? I would get a really macabre, strange feeling. Just an unpleasant feeling when looking at carved marble. I don't know why, but it's a phenomenon. It's a really weird phenomenon. I forgot there's a name for it. Probably just called scared of marble disease or syndrome or whatever. But it's one of these things that I don't know if that's actually capable of storing anything. When I saw the Rosetta Stone, which I believe is basalt rock, it was profoundly the opposite situation, where that particular rock, which is in the basement of the London Museum behind plexiglass, you're staring at a rock that since the late 1700s, every dignitary around the planet Earth has seen the thing. It's a very special rock that was responsible for us translating the phonetic nature of the hieroglyphs, right? And again, there's supposed to be dozens and dozens of that exact rock up and down the Nile, and we have never found a duplicate. It says in the rock, if you read the Rosetta Stone, it says that these are going to be announcements at every dock down the Nile to announce, I think, Ptolemy IV, saying, like, my father the third was killed. We're going to find those people and bring them to justice. And here's the new way. It was like a wanted poster. We've only found one. And they're not even looking for the other ones. It's just so bizarre, right? Now, basalt rock is fairly fragile, but come on. If you had a dozen of them, you should be able to find one more. Now, this one starts getting a little spooky. And we have talked about this in various ways, but the fact that this exists as a formal designation, as a project, is really interesting. And it's called the Global Consciousness Project, or GCP. And it's one of these things, and they list in the documentation that events like 9/11 and the death of Princess Di are two of the world events that galvanizes the entire population to go in one direction. Now, I don't know if this is still up in first season of YouTube. Go to the website, deepthoughtsradio.com. It's on BitChute for sure, probably on Rumble. But I did an episode a really long time ago called Trauma Journalism. What's significant about these events, because this is all explaining the fact that with these events, because you terrorize the world, right? It's never a good thing. It's not like, when we believe that NASA actually landed on the moon, that was a splash of positivity around the world, right? For those that believed. This is a splash of, obviously, fight or flight. When you're in fight or flight, which means you're in a state of panic, your logic to discern information goes to zero. So the next thing they tell you, you will believe it. You will not only believe it, but you will store it in long-term memory, because the mechanisms that make short-term memory are busy being absolutely terrified with the events of the day, or heartbroken or whatever, right? We also had What the Bleep Do We Know? That movie came out. It's a movie you got to see. You don't have to see The Secret, but The Secret was a cleansed version of the same exact thing, in that when you manifest thoughts, you manifest your reality, right? I think a lot of you have figured out that absolutely works, and I will tell you my own experience. I've got a very close friend of mine, Bill, who absolutely is taken care of his entire life. He is an amazing person to begin with, but his absolute filter for his life, being positive and surviving all trials and tribulations, is the most powerful filter I've ever seen any human being that I know have. This guy, I can't say he's fallen uphill, because he works very hard for what he does, and he's just a phenomenal dude. But if Bill were to jump out of a building 100 stories high without a parachute. Somehow that dude's going to land on the ground and he's going to be okay. He's just got that, right? I mean, a plane will drop, a UFO will pick him up, something will happen. He'll sprout wings, he'll land on a, ball of hay, right? I mean, it'll work, right? So I totally believe that's the case. But imagine that they're looking at this from a standpoint of a real productive result, indication giving experience to create these horrific events like Pearl Harbor, because at that moment, they can get everybody on the same page, at least for a little while. And hey, if you have your press ready, you can do magic, right? I think the book is called Quantum Universe. I did an episode on it back in season 1. I showed you the book. No, Holographic Universe. Excuse me. Holographic Universe is the book. It has like 25 PhDs in the front of this book who peer-reviewed the content in the book. And the first 40 to 50% of the book is all scientific stuff. And it's going to get to this Pair Labs, which is Princeton's engineering anomalies research, right? It opens the book, if I remember right, one of the first chapters is to have a pachinko game sort of apparatus, where pachinko is it's found in Asia. It's a brilliant machine where it's a very flat 2D plane, but it's about, half an inch thick, has a piece of glass. You knock these little ball bearings in it, little silver ball bearings, and they bounce all around on these pins, and then they land on the bottom, and you get a prize based on how much it lands on the further edge, because that's statistically the least likely place it's going to land. And in the center, it makes a nice bell. It's always a bell in the center, and it kind of randomly sprinkles out on the edge. They have all kinds of flowers and wild stuff it catches. It's really beautiful. My cousin had one of these. He used to play for hours. What they did at Princeton, if it's the same thing that's in the book, is they had students sit in a room. They took out all the trinkets, and they just basically had pins bringing balls down, and they were looking at the spread, right? When you roll dice, 7 is the most common number, and 1 and 12 are the least common numbers, right? Because there's more ways to make 7 than 1 and 12, right? Or I should say 2 and 12. Excuse me, snake eyes. When the students concentrated on the balls, they said, everybody, I want you to concentrate on moving the balls to the left. And over a period of hours, the average went to the left. Crazy. Then they reversed it. Think about it to the right. It would move to the right. Human beings interacting with the energy of the universe and changing the statistical probability of the bounces on these balls, and they're actually yanking it with their mind. And I doubt any of them believe they have telekinesis. But when they were told they could do this, they did it. Ever so slight, but they did it. The other thing that was in the books is they were looking at things that would eventually expire, like grinders and other machines, and they would have students stare at these things, paid, of course, for like 11 hours straight. They might take a shift or something, and these things would break a little sooner than they would normally break. It wasn't like a normal grinder, right? It wasn't like, a unit that's supposed to last 50 years. It was something that was on the precipice of breaking, but it always had a kind of an average of, say, 2 hours, and the thing would break in, or maybe it was like 12 hours, but it breaks sooner than normal. So that's this other sort of category of research in this. Now, this other theory is, it comes with kind of a bunch of hoopla, in my opinion, which is the single verse versus multiverse theories, right? And this is what supposedly the Hadron Collider and the Higgs boson particle was supposed to prove or disprove. And again, you have random student from the East Coast, random student from the West Coast, both coming up with a frequency that this Higgs boson particle should show up at. And where did they find it after, I think it was boson had died, Higgs was still alive, the press is pounding on the collider because it cost 10 billion euro, then it ruptured and exploded, took another 10 billion to get it running again. When they finally ran it up, they faked finding the Higgs boson particle, and we know it's fake because we're talking about arbitrary theories on both sides of the fence. How could you possibly have the same exact scientific rudimentary beginning and find these two extremes? And they find the Higgs boson particle exactly between those 2 points. It's just like, okay, so, winner, winner, chicken dinner, right? It's a win-win situation. Both you guys are kind of wrong. But the idea is the the amount of vibration that this fake particle is, it's all a fake thing. I'm sorry to tell you. It's all just BS to justify creating this big machine. I don't know if it's a money laundering thing or they're opening up some portal to hell. Who knows, right? But the idea was that it's very similar to the way that a cell phone tower works, right? 3G only had had a wave band of a certain width, and every time the wave went up and down, you get a distinct piece of information, a 1 or a 0. So 4G shrank it to about 2.5 feet, and that was pretty fast. You go around corners, and you got much better reception. Then 5G comes out, and it turns into like a half an inch, like a centimeter. So now, every little bounce up and down, you get to process more information. It's the same theory of your processor in your computer, which is why you want more gigahertz, because every time there's a hertz, you get a distinct piece of information, which equals an equation, which turns into something that's like a video game or a piece of music or whatever. But it's obviously only really targeted at people that got to crunch numbers a lot, right? All right. If the universe itself has a frequency that is bouncing up and down, and it's bouncing up and down more than we need it to provide the information for our universe, then this mathematical theory, and it's just a theory, folks. The mathematical theory is that other universes can exist with the stray frequencies that we don't need, the other bits inside the data stream. Like, let's just say this thing, I'm just going to make this up. This has nothing to do with their theory and whatever. Let's just say it did 10 bounces within a microsecond, right? It's a very small period of time. And we only need 2 to create our universe, or maybe even 1. We just need 1 to create our particular universe, right? That leaves 9 bounces in the frequency of 10 that could be used for 9 other universes. This is a romantic theory, which might actually end up being something more substantial in the future when we stop lying about these Higgs boson particles and what hadron colliders are for. But the interesting idea is that you could physically explain why people can see other dimensions. They take DMT and suddenly my buddy has a gray alien taking him all over the universe until he went the 10th time and it was like put his forehead on his forehead and made him look right into his big almond eyes and he said, "Stop coming here. This is not your place. You're welcome to visit, but you got to stop coming here because you're invading our space," right? Which is interesting. Could you imagine your job in our universe right here is to take care of random visitors? I guess there's no taxes and bills in that world, right? But given the fact that everything that we see is infinite in the positive growth direction and it's infinite in the micro direction, the idea that we would have to have this ridiculous theory of multiverse versus single verse is absurd. We live in a fractal universe. We know we do. We can see it in the branches of a tree, and we can see in the vascular system of a human lung, and it just goes down as far as you can look and is up as far as you can look. So the idea that there's any limitation to the concept that we have multiverse is an absurd concept to begin with, in my opinion. This other one is kind of loose, and it's quantum echoes of trauma. And it's sort of just a romantic theory that when we as human beings have a unified moment or even a singular moment of absolute trauma, that we are warping the universe in a permanent echo out into the system. So if Earth it was just like when Endor is blown up in Star Wars 1, or, Episode 4, New Hope, and Obi-Wan Kenobi goes, "Oh God, what the hell was that?" And he's like, it was like a billion voices screaming out at the same time. That's exactly what they're talking about with this theory of quantum echoes. It's plausible that you're definitely sending out a particular signal, but through the fact that energy is going to have entropy in the universe and it's going to diffuse and get canceled, the idea is that, it's only going to go for a distance and then it's going to basically kind of get diluted in the universe, right? I'm going to tell you one scenario. My super hardcore listeners have heard this a few times. I used to, I wanted to play Dungeons & Dragons when I was a kid, didn't have anyone to play with. So when I got my 20s and I got into employment at an electronic arts video game company, the dudes who worked there played. And we're talking about some of the smartest, amazing game designers on planet Earth. So these games were awesome, okay? Plus it teaches you how to write when you become a GM of your own or a DM. But there was an interesting thing that happened. I just talked to my buddy, Bill, from the industry. And I reminded him, now we're in our 50s, I was like, dude, when I was, we were playing, we're like in our mid 20s, early 20s. There was a scenario where my team had gone underground. There's a little D&D story for you, right? We had gone down into a cave, and it was one of these caves that was lit by the moss on the walls. And we're chasing orcs down in this place, or at least they were there. And we're riding a river down, and I'm a wood elf, and my buddy's a normal elf, and we have some other folks, halflings and human. And I had never seen a wood elf before. After I left my homeworld, I'd never seen a wood elf since then. And we kind of played the backstory that I don't remember my family because you live hundreds of years as an elf. Anyway, so we go into this tavern that had been ransacked by these orcs. We could tell it's just all the debris down there. Walking single file, But there was a wood elf bartender, female, behind the bar, and she had been absolutely brutalized in the most graphic way possible. And because the DM was telling us all the details, and you're in the moment, man. You're role playing, right? You let yourself be the character, right? You're method acting like crazy. And it was heartbreaking to find the other Gelfling, right? And she's dead, and she's been abused really badly. So I'm pissed off as a character. And that's just the fun of the game. Just let yourself get in. So we get back in this boat, and they're all gone. All the orcs are gone, right? And so we go down the river. We find, we can hear them up there, and they're having a celebration and a party. They have found a clearing off to the side, and they're all celebrating. As soon as our boat's pretty far away, as soon as we get around the corner, I can see the king, the guy who's in charge, whatever, the head military guy, he's sitting in a throne that they carry with them, right? And he's obviously got a goblet and he's drinking. I know it sounds crazy. I'm telling you this in the middle of this, but this has got a real world quantum thing that pops up here, and it happened 3 times. I look at this dude, and I'm still playing that just, young, meat-headed wood elf, and I basically tell the GM, I'm like, I get off the boat and I go for this guy, and the whole room just goes, what? Really? You're just gonna run after this guy? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna kill this mother, effer. And so when you're playing this game, for those of you who played, you understand there's a 20-sided die. When you roll a 1, you have to roll to see if you broke your weapon. If you roll a 20, you get double damage, and everything else in between is just a mathematical equation for how much damage you do. And I'm running at this guy, and I got this big-ass sword with me. And my mind, wants to kill this guy because of the rape and murder of this girl back at the tavern. I start rolling that 20-sided die. And I got this amazing sphere around my body, a very specific glass sphere. And I mean, everyone was fish-eyed on the other side of this thing. And I told the room, I said, I just felt it in I was controlling the universe. It was the most crazy thing ever. And I said, I'm going to roll a 20. And I'm not doing the boasting, I'm going to roll a 20 because I just want one. I was going to roll a 20. And poof, it's right there on the table. And I sliced the guy in half. And just like Klingons, they kind of flee when their, major guy is gone. And I looked at my buddy Bill and I said, my God, no, that was weird. I said, something happened. I controlled the die just then. And my buddy Bill looks at me, who's been playing since he was a kid. And he just goes, yeah, you can control the dice every once in a while. Happened 2 more times. Same sphere, same amazing feeling. And this is sort of getting at what this quantum, frequencies are capable of doing. You are absolutely capable of engaging if you so need to. Have you ever been in a near car accident and you were awake, like you were someone else is driving strangely and you're having to mitigate this thing and drive your car a certain way? There are frequencies that will enter your body that goes, I'm getting out of this. And you'll steer a certain way and you won't get hit and everyone else crunches into each other. And LA traffic, I've had plenty of these experiences, right? So that is a dive into the quantum theory version of this entire spectrum of research. The most encouraging thing I can say is that some people are thinking about this kind of stuff. I think a lot of us believe that, man was in tune with these things because we didn't have mathematics and universities, right, to make us unified in one particular belief system. We simply used our eyes and our hearts and our bodies as the sensory mechanisms to determine cause and effect. And of course, if, they try to tell you that everybody died at 30 years old back in the day, there were definitely times in history where the life expectancy of a human being was very short. But if you really study history and the corpses and how old these folks were, especially of famous people, that was a tiny infinitesimal part of the history of man. Pharaohs would commonly die in their 90s. People who were building the pyramids, which we found all their bodies around the pyramids in their 70s, have all their teeth. So the reason why I mention that is that the longer you would live in this basking observational reality where you're basically just acknowledging what you see, and you have written word, or at least orated memories. I think they wrote everything down because, the Babylonians themselves had cuneiform tablets talking about how many furs they sold in a particular day. You don't think they would write down the engineering and science as well, if that stuff is real? Somehow the pyramids got built with a lot of engineering, and there are hundreds of them. So no one's orating this stuff around. They are actually writing that down, but we just can't find any of the schematics for how that works, right? And again, pyramids are never mentioned in any of the hieroglyphs. Isn't that funny? If you see a pyramid in hieroglyphs, that's a symbol for gift, not pyramid. I'll give you this pyramid, right? Here's what's fascinating about this area of thought. I'm not going to say science. If you're an observant human being, you're just as good as any of these folks. As a matter of fact, you're more free to think out of the box than any of these scientists who literally will whip themselves on their back, right? Like Brother Justin from Carnival. They'll whip themselves on the back for thinking a negative thought outside of the flying quote sciences out there. So you could be an extremely powerful human being by simply sitting down and taking the stuff that I just mentioned in your experiences and correlating it into something that you can share with the rest of us, maybe the comments, or just make your own video or start having the conversation. Start writing down on a piece of paper so you can see your thoughts and start connecting dots together, especially the more paranormal stuff that you might have experienced in your lifetime. Be brutally honest with yourself about anything that seems out of the norm. I'll give you a few examples. Like, I've given you guys 2 alien experiences that I had. One was absolutely corroborated by the fact they told me what was in one of my Christmas presents. It was something I couldn't even conceive, and the dude was right. And then another one where 2 dudes came in my bedroom, got on my bed. I touched their hands. They touched me. It was like all this touchy-feely stuff, which doesn't happen in dreams. However, either they erased my memory after we hung out for about 10 minutes, or that was a dream. But I tell you, if it was a dream, it was the most unbelievable sensory input dream that I have never recreated ever. And the other dude from the first experience touched my shoulder, and I felt that too. Absolutely bizarre, right? But I have to be brutally honest. I had an experience when I was 9 years old, and this is like, if you were to put it in a movie, it would go like this. I'm 9 years old walking home, and now here's the thing. Now, we've had Close Encounters come out. Okay, I'd seen that movie about a couple of years earlier. And I can still see it in my mind today. That's the crazy thing. I'm in my 50s now, and I can still see this. There was a UFO, not a disc. It was very intricate, flying over this church parking lot and over a cemetery, and then taking off. And there was a ton of us human beings, broad daylight, summertime, watching this thing. And it was kind of like, oh, I finally saw one, because I was so young. I was like, oh, everybody sees one of these things eventually, right? Nope. But I was 9 years old. None of us got together afterwards. It wasn't in the newspaper, so I must have dreamed an amazing dream of this UFO. But it took me years to subtract that out of my mind as actually being a real event. Right now, it's easy. I just throw everything out the door, and everything has to fight to get back into that truth pile, right? So as you're analyzing what you think you've seen, just be your best critic. You don't have to tell another human being that you might have fibbed every once in a while because you just didn't remember that, well, that was kind of a dream or whatever. But anything you think is super concrete, right? Write that one down with a big star by it. I was a kid. I walked into a kitchen once. I almost passed out. This woman's making macaroni and cheese. Her son, 5-year-old son's outside, and I nearly passed out. And she's like, do you want some macaroni and cheese? And I said, she goes, are you okay? Because look, I'm about to pass out, right? I was 11 years old. And I said, someone's outside, or someone's going to be at that door, and they're going to be hurt. wait 2 seconds in the script, bam, bam, bam on the door. Her kid's screaming on the other side, and she's looking at me. She's knocked out paws looking at me because I predicted it before it happened. Sure enough, the beagle dog bit the kid, but a huge chunk out of this kid's front stomach. He had to get stitches. So they hauled him off to the hospital. She never came back to me and said, hey, kid, how the hell did you know that? Right? Philip K. Dick had a few of those experiences. So when you experience some of those weird things, and it's concrete, man, everybody saw it, everybody gets in it, whether or not they could deal with it, whatever. That's where you start manifesting a little bit of reality. Well, what was that all about? Slow down your brain. Try to figure out how things changed. What could have affected it? What time of day was it? All the stuff that's in this episode, right? I think you feel me. Sorry it took so long to make an episode. I've just been super busy. I think over the next month here, I'm going to get this product out I've been making for 3 years, and I'm going to get a lot of my time back, especially my after-hours stuff. So we should be able to get back on track. If you haven't been to the website, please go to deepthoughtsradio.com. Again, if you can't find an episode, I get a lot of you asking me in the comments section, hey man, I can't find that episode. Totally understand. But if you do get over to the website, you might find a whole category list for the thing that you're looking for. He's like, you said about that alien thing in this episode. Man, there's a whole category of alien discussions, UFO discussions broke out separately, moon landing stuff, all separate. And I put you to the right place. So we've got it on Rumble, BitChute, YouTube. I got a little bit on Brighteon, but no one's going to Brighteon. A few other weird sites. But our other alternate social media is up there. So when I announce a new video and you didn't want to get it from the standard Big Brother ones, you can get it from minds.com, Gab, Getter.com. You get all these different places. So you just sign up over there and you're like, you don't have to go over there. But as soon as you get a notification, it can come from that source. I'm a little late on the podcast, so I do apologize. I like to get a few views going on YouTube before killing the flow. But do know we have a store over there with some pretty cool shirts. Things are picking up over there, so I really appreciate you guys. Patreon is completely free now. You can donate. There's obviously PayPal as well if you really feel like you want to buy a sticker or whatever for me. But anyway, I just love to have you guys. Please put comments all over the place and understand there are 800 videos out there waiting for you to just scoop that up and make your brain real huge and teach me a thing or two. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.